Did you know in medieval times, sex was not allowed on certain days of the week? Well, in this video, we will explore that and 9 other shocking yet fascinating things about medieval life that we don't understand in this modern world. So, stay tuned and enjoy the video. Courtly love. So, marriage in medieval times had one huge thing missing, and that is love. The reasons for marriage had many reasons, but very rarely considered love as a reason. So, nobles of that time brought up a new law called courtly love. This law allowed men and women to practice the elements of love with anyone outside the marriage. They even brought up the saying, "Marriage is not a real excuse for not loving." They were allowed to dance, spend time, and maybe do a little hand-holding. But sex was not allowed because only the spouse was allowed to have sex. This is like indirectly saying marriage is not the place for showing or having love, it is strictly business. If you want to experience the elements of love, do it here. We are glad people don't follow traditions like this today. Cat burning. Cats were worshipped as goddesses by the ancient Egyptians and were associated with the devil by medieval Europeans. In the Middle Ages, Christians believed that God had given them dominion over the natural world, and that cats, unlike dogs, could not be controlled. This fear of cats struck fear into the hearts of people everywhere. This fear was even reflected in religious law, with Pope Gregory IX issuing the papal bull called Vox in Rama, in which he declared that Satan himself routinely takes the shape of a cat, and that devil worshippers kiss the anus of a cat at black magic banquets to win the favor of Lucifer. This feline phobia reached its peak during the bubonic plague in the middle of the 14th century when cats were believed to spread the deadly bacterium instead of rats. Almost entire cat species were excommunicated under Pope Innocent IX in the 15th century as the Church began its witch crusades in Europe. Cat burnings in Europe went on for centuries, with some scholars estimating that the death toll was in the millions. Most of the cats were incinerated, but some were trapped in barrels and beaten to death. Fortunately, animal cruelty laws that came into existence in the 1800s ended this systemic slaughter. No sex on certain days of the week. During the Middle Ages, several religious laws were in place that sought to limit when a person could engage in sexual activity. On average, a married couple was only allowed to engage in sexual activity on 4 of the 7 days of the week. The days when sex was prohibited included Thursday and Friday, when people were supposed to be preparing for Holy Communion, and Sunday, which was the Lord's Day. There were also many other times of the year when sex was prohibited, such as 40 to 60 days during Lent, 35 days before Christmas, and 40 to 60 days around the Feast of Pentecost. In the Middle Ages, people believed that eye contact was a key component of sexual attraction. Since the mere act of looking can stimulate desire in both the observer and the observed, the women were cautioned to be careful when looking at men on these days to avoid temptation. Tithing and frank pledge. Back in the days when there were no cell phones, the internet, and 911, how did medieval people keep an eye on their neighbors? That's when the tithing and frank pledges came into play. Tithing was like medieval villagers would gather in groups of 10 or tithings and pledge to each other to keep each other safe. If one member did something bad, the others would bring him to justice. It was a built-in system of accountability. Each tithing group was made up of 9 other tithes to form 100, and it was like each tithing group was required to vouch for the good behavior of the other tithings. If all 100 members committed a crime, everyone in the group had to make sure that they faced justice. It was like having your entire friend group held responsible for the one friend who can't resist stealing fries from someone else's plate. Now you may be wondering why people did this. Well, tithing and frank pledges were more about community trust than uniform law enforcement. These systems developed over time, but became less common as more formal legal structures came into place. Newlyweds had to kiss over stacked pastries. Weddings are one of the few events in a person's life that are subject to more strange beliefs and rituals. Even today, people still want to include things like something old, something new, something borrowed, or something blue in their wedding. There's not much of a reason behind it. It's just tradition or superstition, however you want to look at it. In medieval times, one of the wedding traditions was to build a tower of cake or a spiced bun. Think of it as an old-fashioned version of a multi-tiered cake. Instead of just looking big and boss, the newlyweds would have to stand over the top of the cake and kiss each other. If the couple's kiss went smoothly, then it was a sign of good luck. If it went bad, then it was considered as a bad start to their new life. Animal court. Life in the Middle Ages was hard, and it wasn't just for humans. Like humans, animals were also put on trial. From cattle to insects, they were all suspected of crimes. There are at least 85 documented animal trials that occurred in the Middle Ages, and the stories range from tragic to bizarre. The most notorious were the pigs, who were accused and found guilty of chewing off bodies and even eating babies. Most of the pigs were executed by hanging or burning at the stake for their crimes. A pig was put on trial in 1386 and given a human mask and waistcoat with gloves and drawers for his crime. Pigs weren't the only animals to suffer from the law. In 1474, a court found an egg-laying cock guilty of the unnatural crime of egg-laying. Unwanted rats were often sent a wooden letter telling them to go away, and dolphins were trailed in 1596 in Marseille. One donkey, which found herself the victim of unwanted sexual advances, was trailed by the court and proclaimed innocent after a strong recommendation from a convent prior, declaring her to be a virtuous and well-behaved animal. Even though these traditions are bizarre, not all of the trials ended in brutality. Medieval guilds and secret handshakes. Imagine that you are an expert craftsman of the 12th century, skilled in making swords or intricate tapestries, but you want something more than a paycheck. You want to belong to a larger organization, a medieval equivalent to a modern professional association. This is where guilds come into play. Guilds weren't just about making pretty door knockers and fancy goblets. They were the original social networks of the Middle Ages, where craftsmen or artisans joined together. They weren't simply about sharing trade secrets, but mentoring young apprentices and upholding quality standards. They also helped members in times of hardship. Think of it this way. Guilds were like trade unions in the Middle Ages. They were exclusive clubs of blacksmiths, bakers, and brewers, but they also did more than protect the interests of their members. Guilds were the guardians of their craft, ensuring that poor workmanship did not damage their reputation. What's interesting about these guilds is that they weren't just about hammers and anvils. They also had a moral code. They were like the medieval knights of craft, promoting values and morality. They made fine suits of armor, but they also wanted to be honest members of society. As time went on, these guilds developed, and their influence spread beyond the workshop. They played a major role in shaping what is now known as vocation. Public execution. Public executions in the medieval period served several purposes. They served as a deterrent, as a reminder of good moral behavior, and as a communal event. People voluntarily participated in public executions. Public executions were ritualized and served to bring people together. They also served as the final step in the process of purifying society of a criminal or sinner. In the medieval world, there were several types of execution. Some criminals were sentenced to hang, while others were executed by beheading. The crowds were not passive spectators. They often shouted for the ones who were about to be executed, either in a way to support the criminal or in sympathy for them. Churchmen stood alongside royal officials, supervising the executions on behalf of the interdependent religious and secular authorities of the medieval world. Only in the late 18th century and early 19th century did public executions begin to move into a more private setting. Trial by ordeal. Have you ever wondered how our ancestors resolved disputes in medieval Europe? Imagine this. You are charged with a crime in medieval Europe, and your fate hangs in the balance of surviving an ordeal. Yes, you heard me right. The Middle Ages weren't just about knights or castles. It was also about divine judgment. This is how it worked. First, you would be charged with a crime such as theft or witchcraft. Then, you had to choose your ordeal. There were two main options, an ordeal by fire or an ordeal by water. An ordeal by fire involved holding a hot iron bar in your hand or walking barefoot across burning coals. If you miraculously heal your hands or feet after a few days, you are considered innocent and will be left free. But if you didn't miraculously heal your feet, you probably will not enjoy the healthcare given after that. An ordeal by water meant being tied up and thrown into a pond or a river. If you sank, you were considered innocent, because they believed that water wouldn't accept a sinner. So if you floated, it is believed that you were rejected by the divine waters, and as a punishment for the crime, you will be put into hot water. This strange practice reflects the belief that God would intervene and protect the innocent. Master's permission to get married. Nowadays, asking your father permission to marry someone you like is common, and it is done out of respect. But the answer you get doesn't determine your future. You can still marry, even if your father doesn't bless you. But in the Middle Ages, this wasn't the case. Societal rank was very important, especially for peasants and serfs who worked and lived under landowners. A man who wants to marry not only has to get permission from his father, but also from his landowner. For a woman, it was even worse. If her husband dies after the marriage, her landowner could force her to marry another man within a relatively short period of time. If she refused to do it, the landowners had the permission to punish her for that. Before we wrap up, if you would like to know about the ancient technologies too advanced for their time, click on this video. Thank you for watching the video, and if you like this video, please press the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.